Nikki and Rob, Tat, Charlie Goldberg, Verena Lukas are all returning to Art Viewing Adventures. They are, I call them the dream team for talking about photography. I always love looking at and talking with you guys about photography. So thank you very much for making yourselves available to talk about this great exhibition at SFMOMA. So Rob, I think you'll start up the slides and let's start
Yeah.
talking about this
All
really
right.
impressive exhibition.
Are we good? You see the slides?
I do.
Wonderful. All right. So, oops, just a second here. I screwed something up there. Let me get rid of that. Okay. All right. No, I'm sorry. I I think I've lost them here. Just a minute. What's going on here? Can you see me?
Oh yeah, we see
I mean,
you. See the slides.
oh, you see the slides? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. I punched something and it kind of went away. Okay. So very good. So hello everybody and welcome back to some of our regulars. Always nice to see you. Today we're going to walk you through the current exhibition at SFMOMA, which is called Around Group F.64, and the first question is, of course, why the strange title? Why do they call it Around Group F.64? Well, because it not only covers Group F.64, which we will talk about in depth, but it also covers what came before it and what came after it. What came before it being pictorialism, which prompted the Group F.64 movement, and then what came after it, what was influenced by what Group F.64 had done. So the exhibition, will feature several galleries having to do with the before and after as well. But we start with pictorialism, which is the before gallery, if you will, and. Pictorialism is a movement in photography that started late 19th, early 20th century, and it was really the first fine art photography, if you will. It's really where photographers became artists, became recognized as artists. Before that, photography was primarily a documentation medium and not really used for art, if you will. However, the pictorialists were criticized because they mimicked painting, as you see in this piece, soft focus, dulling the natural clarity of the photographic image. So a lot of people felt that they were kind of trying too hard to make a photograph look like other art that people were used to. In any event, we're going to walk you through a couple of the pieces that were in the pictorialist movement, and then see how that prompted F.64. So Charlie.
So this is Annie Brigman, who was a very, very important pictorialist at the time. And as you can see, this has exactly what Rob was talking about. It has this soft focus. But the other thing that you should really look at is what are the themes, of her photography. And in classic art, the important themes were things like biblical stories, uh, war scenes, scenes from mythology. And you can see how this photo really depicts that. The women that we see here, it's as though, they're sort of muses in nature, and you can almost imagine this being something from a mythological scene. But it's really typical of a pictorialist photo. Uh, you have another one, Rob, that we're going to talk about? And so, here, if you look to the right, there was a very famous 19th century photographer named Juliet Margaret Cameron, and here she's using, the passing of Arthur. So this would be King Arthur. So it's exactly what I was talking about, how you have these sort of very grandiose themes in people's photographs. And Juliet Margaret Cameron was famous for setting up these very carefully constructed biblical scenes, historical scenes. And of course, she had this coterie of really famous writers and poets that she would use in her photographs. So you'd see, lots of important people of the time, including Darwin in some of her photographs. It's really interesting. But, you get a sense of where the pictorialists were coming from. They're really sort of based on some of the stuff that Cameron did.
Yeah, and here's another piece by William Dasonville, Skyline of San Francisco, and I included this because it's a good one to talk about an alternative way to understand pictorialism. As I said, a lot of people thought, well, you know, they're just trying to make photographs look like paintings by making them soft focus and all that. But I have seen pictorialism referred to as impressionistic photography. And, you know, it comes along at the same time as the impressionist painters. And if you are familiar with them, basically an impressionist painting is where the artist is giving you an emotional, trying to communicate the emotion that he or she has into the picture. And so similarly, you take a picture like this, and you can see that Dasonville may well be trying to give us, you know, his impression, his emotional impression. So it's another way to understand pictorialism, perhaps a little more positive way. But one of the great pictorialists was Alfred Stieglitz, a great American photographer in any event. And interestingly, he had been a strong pictorialist, but he moved away from it, and he founded a movement called the photo secession, which was to secede from the pictorialist movement. And the ideas, the goals of it were to promote photography as a respected and independent medium, to nurture it as an American vision of photography as art. And however, despite these goals, which are somewhat similar to what we will see are the goals of Group F.64, despite that, he did not recognize Group F.64 when they were established. Nonetheless, he did create this wonderful photograph. I'm sure you've all seen this, called the Steerage. It's a landmark photograph, and we're showing it here really because it is a transition. It marks a transition from pictorialism to modernism. It is considered to be Stieglitz's finest photograph, and it is also considered to be the first modern photograph, interestingly. And what you see going on here, of course, is the class division, the lower class people, passengers here, and then the upper class passengers better dressed and so on, and they're divided by this very strong vector of the white gangplank. But also there's some very interesting repetitions of shapes. For example, the very prominent straw hat here, the circular straw hat, repeated in a circle here and a circle here, and even in the what do they call that?
Smokestack?
Yes, exactly. From the ship. So anyway, you see that, but it's a marvelous picture. You could look at it all day. Really quite wonderful. So that brings us to a Group F.64 into the next gallery, the main gallery of the exhibition. And a little bit of background on it, which is sort of interesting, is how this whole thing got started. On the evening of October 15th, 1932, a group of Bay Area photographers gathered at a home at 683 Brockhurst in Oakland. It's the home of Willard Van Dyke. And this is what the spot looks like today. Here is the site. Unfortunately, the original house was torn down. So, but we can imagine it was something like these others, and this is a more modern house. But it's interesting just to see the site, because what happened there really did change the direction of photography, not only in America, but really influenced all over the world. There were a number of well-known photographers there. It was a social event on a Saturday night, among them Imogen Cunningham, Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Willard Van Dyke, Sonia Niskoyak, and others. And they had a few drinks, and they were feeling no pain, and they started chatting, and they started talking about photography and the fact that pictorialism was not achieving the potential of the medium. and that they sought to recognize photography, the recognition of photography as an art form, which really it was just beginning to be. And they decided that if Stieglitz would not recognize them, that they would start their own movement, their own independent movement, which would be insistently Western in its feeling, and that they would promote what was called straight or pure photography by publicly defining the medium and explaining its limits and its strengths. And they created, not that evening, but another evening, they got together and created a manifesto. Not unlike the manifesto, the Surrealist manifesto that was created by Andre Breton. And in the manifesto, they stated that pictorialism ignored photography's unique strength, its ability to produce a sharply focused, finely detailed, what they called lens-formed image. And that the Group F.64 mission, therefore, would be to make photographs of startling clarity and beauty that rivaled art made in other mediums. And they acknowledged that many times their photographs, the ones that they were making, were really less about subject and more concerned with graphic matters, form, and texture. These words coming directly from the manifesto. Well, thus the idea of F.64 was born, and a lot of people ask, what does the name mean? What is Group F.64? Well, F.64 refers to an aperture on a photographic lens, and it is the smallest aperture, and therefore it yields the sharpest photograph, sharpest focus, and also the longest, what we call depth of field, how long what is in focus from the foreground to the background. Like, for example, in this photograph, you see that right here, the foreground is very sharply focused, and then these pipes that are back a number of feet are still in focus. So that would be called, long depth of field. Well, another meeting, and they soon arranged to have an exhibition at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, with the support of the then director of the museum, Lloyd Rollins, who was an early museum professional to recognize photography as art. At that time, there really were not many museums showing photography. And so this first effort, they decided, would be a group exhibition with the stated goal to demonstrate what photography should be. And so the second gallery in the exhibition at MoMA, SFMOMA, features the works, features photographs of the 11 photographers whose work was in that first exhibition. So we're going to walk you around that now. And as you enter that gallery, one of the most prominent walls that you see is this one with 4 Edward Weston photographs displayed just as you see them next to each other in a row. Now, Edward Weston's work really substantiated the entire Group F.64 manifesto, and you'll see it here. Sharp focus, great detail, complete depth of field, very long depth of field, sharpness, foreground to background, rich tonalities in the prints, photographing everyday objects, and filling the entire frame. Now, one of the most concise descriptions of Edward Weston's contribution as a photographer, and indeed that represents the Group F.64 aesthetic, if you will, appears in the SFMOMA wall label that accompanies this suite of photographs on the wall. And so with your indulgence, I'd like to read it with you. Weston monumentalized the mundane in these iconic still lifes and figure studies. He found beauty in the bend of an elbow, the curve of a pepper, the iridescent gleam of a nautilus shell, and even the smooth rounded shape of a porcelain toilet. With a large format camera, Weston would move close to his subjects and set them against a simple monochromatic background to accentuate the contour, form, and texture. he famously declared photography's descriptive powers to be the medium's defining quality, championing how it renders, quote, the very substance and quintessence of the thing itself. The thing itself, that really is, that summarizes what f.64 was all about, showing the thing itself. So Charlie, walk us through some other photographs
If you
here.
could go back just to the prior slide for a second, Rob.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to think about the photographs that we showed of the pictorialists, right? We had that beautiful skyline of San Francisco with the fog in the background. We had Brigman's women next to that tree. Here, all of a sudden, you can see that little objects, day-to-day quotidian objects, are what are being used. Go to the next slide, Rob. And what could be more quotidian than a toilet, right? Here's Edward Weston doing excusado, which means toilet in Spanish. And of course, this photograph would never exist as an artistic photograph. It wasn't for Duchamp doing a similar thing in the prior decade, where he decided that he was going to put this, urinal on a pedestal and call it art. And of course, there's a great quote by Redford Mason here: photography is an art when the photographer is an artist. And it's kind of like a takeoff of Marcel Duchamp's, it's art if I say it's art. And so here we have Weston doing the exact same thing. And all of a sudden, he's forcing us to look at the different types of shadows and the different curves and the different lines that occur from this photograph. The other thing to notice about this photograph is it's taken from what's called a worm's eye view. You can imagine the camera being basically on the floor here to take this photograph, and you're looking up at at the toilet. This is not the point of view that you would normally see on these simple objects. So it's really fascinating from a couple of different perspectives.
Yeah, and I would add that Weston, in his day books, which are his diaries, where he talks extensively about his work, talked about how long it took him to make this photograph. He tried many different angles and placing his camera, so it wasn't an easy photograph to make, and this is the final one.
Rena, feel free to pop in if you have any comments too. Rena? Yeah. Okay, just go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, well, continue with Brett then.
Okay, so then here we have his son, Brett Weston. There's a whole family of Westons who were photographers, and in fact, his granddaughter Cara just by chance happened to go to high school with my wife, and she was a big departure from the other Westons in that she started using digital photography, which caused this big rupture in the family in terms of what was considered true art, true photographic art. But we have Brett Weston, who is really a prodigy. He started in his teenage years doing these incredibly wonderful photographs. If we can go to just cone in on the central photograph, he did this when he was something like 16 or 17 years old. And it's really a brilliant photograph that really fits into that whole f.64 manifesto. Here, what are we looking at? We're not really looking at a person's face. We're just really paring it down to the most essential parts. We're looking at an ear. We're looking at fingers with fingernails. We're looking at the hair. So what you've got is this pastiche of textures. We can see the texture of the hair. We can see the lines of wrinkles along the finger. We can see the curves. And think about that photograph of the toilet and how you saw the curves of the toilet. It's not unlike what he's showing us here with the curve of the ear. It's a really fascinating photograph. And again, as a teenager, he's doing these remarkable photographs.
And remember the line from the manifesto: they're more interested in the shapes and lines than they are the subject.
All right, let's go to the next one. And here we have Preston Holder. And what he's doing, again, is looking at something very mundane. We're not looking at an entire bridge. We're looking at a very specific portion of the bridge. And by doing that, he's making us look at angles that we might not normally pay attention to. So what we're seeing, for example, are these large triangles that grow across the beams of this bridge. But within the cross beams, we're seeing even more shapes, more angles, more geometric forms. So we can see triangles, we can see hexagons, we can see an octagon, all within that. So Holder is making us look at this bridge in a very specific way that the pictorialists would not have done. The pictorialists would have shown you the whole bridge with a, very dramatic sky in the background. That's not what the F.64 group is about. They're really exploring shapes, they're exploring geometry, they're exploring shadowing.
And of course, the modernist photography movement is beginning in Europe about the same time, and which is again along the same lines. Very interested in shapes, unusual angles, and the abstractions. You really see photograph like this. You really see the abstraction.
Go ahead, Rob. You're gonna.
No, this is yours still, I think. Yes.
I was going to talk about the photograph on the left, but here we have Imogen Cunningham, who's an early member of this group. And Rob had mentioned how the Surrealists had a manifesto. Well, one of the things I can tell you about the Surrealists is they were not interested in the women of the group at all. They weren't really recognized as artists per se. They were seen either as sexual objects or as muses for the
Love it.
artists to paint. And that wasn't the case at all with F.64. Right from the start, you had 2, 3 very, very important women photographers who were rubbing shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the group. And, none more important than Imogen Cunningham, who does this photograph of calla leaves. And again, think of the subject here. We're looking at something very mundane. And what in particular is she paying attention to? She's showing us how the little venules of the leaf pop out and how the light plays among the different portions of the leaves. But the other thing I love about what she's doing here in this photograph is her use of negative space. And if you don't know what I mean by negative space, what I want you to do is sort of fuzz up your eyes while you're looking at this photograph and try to ignore whatever's dark in the photograph and think about what's light in the photograph, and then imagine those shapes and forms. It's kind of like those games where you sort of reverse how you're looking at something. And I find that the negative space of this photograph is just as interesting as the positive space. And so what she's doing is all of a sudden she's forcing us to look at abstract form within something that's completely not abstract. I mean, let's face it, you can hold a leaf in your hand. But when you look at this photograph, you're starting to see other shapes. Like for me, using the positive space, I can almost imagine that there's this creature that's munching on the leaf to the left. I don't know if other people can enjoy that. But she's allowing us to use our eyes in different ways than we might have before.
Verena, I think you had some thoughts on this one before.
Well, I mean, basically, it's the beginning of F.64, and Imogen Cunningham was one of the more important photographers there. And she has done a lot of other photographs of plants. And some of those, I don't know whether you have slides of that, are absolutely stunning. Do you have any other slides of her?
Well, we have the previous one that has this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, there are others too that are so stunning. If you see them on the wall, you really almost do a double take. And for a photographer to get that close to a plant is something that was basically unheard of. But then another thing I wanted to mention that later, what also really is important in F.64 photography is the darkroom.
Yes.
Because you see photographs as you're seeing them now, you see the calla leaves. If you were to see the negative, it would most likely, I mean, in Ansel Adams, we can see that, most likely be totally different. And once you're in the darkroom, that's when you're real work is starting for a lot of the photographers in f/64.
Yeah, and one more comment, and then we're going to move on to the next picture. But I'm always interested in where a photographer crops their image, and whether that was in the darkroom or whether it was in the camera. But look at how Imogen is cutting off the edges of the leaves. Interesting, huh? It makes quite a different picture than if you were seeing the entire plant with the two leaves.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to call out a comment. Paco said he also finds this a stunning image, and it makes him think about branches.
Yeah.
And I agree, like the cropping, it forms these shapes in the negative space that Charlie was talking about.
Right.
Without it, it wouldn't.
These three triangles, if you will, almost.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on. Charlie.
So I love this particular work by Willard Van Dyke. It's called The Boxer's Hands. And, Rob talked about cropping, and I hope everyone understands that when we're talking about cropping is, what are you putting in your photograph? What are you actually seeing? And if you look at how Van Dyke has cropped this particular photograph, again, think about if you had the camera in your hand and you were going to take a picture of a boxer. If it were me, I certainly would have included his face. I certainly would have included the rest of his shoulders. But here, what Van Dyke is doing is he's really making us look at what is the pure essence of a boxer. What are a boxer's tools? They're his hands. I'm using his in this particular case. We're talking about a male boxer here. But that's what he's focusing on. We're looking at how carefully he's wrapping his hands before he puts those gloves on. And again, think how claustrophobic this photograph is. It's very, very tight. And so what we're seeing is all these different textures again. We're seeing the textures of the white wraps. We're seeing the freckles on his hands. We're seeing the hair on his chest. We're seeing the sort of almost linen or canvas type shorts that the person has. It's a fascinating photograph that I myself would not have done in this way. And I think it's always interesting to get into the head of the artist and think of what they've done that you might or might not have done.
Okay, well, we're going to move on to Ansel Adams, who was a very important member of Group F.64. He was active in organizing it and organizing and publicizing the exhibition that they did at the De Young Museum. And this is a later photograph. It's 1941. It wasn't done in the period that we're talking about, but we're showing it here because it really is his masterpiece. It's probably his most famous photograph, Moonrise Hernandez. And to what Verena was talking about, here is the negative. This is what it looked like. Really, it looks all washed out, but this is basically what we call a single light print with no manipulation. But the reality is that, and the story behind it is quite interesting. Adams was driving home from photographing a full day of photography in New Mexico, and he saw this scene. And the moon was rising, and the sun was setting, and the sun was lighting up all these buildings in the foreground, and it was a gorgeous picture. And he had only one plate left, one piece of film for his large format camera. So he quickly set up his tripod and his camera, and he inserted the plate, but then he could not find his light meter. And the sun was setting. He was running out of time. But because Adams was such a marvelous technician, he remembered the foot candle reading of the moon. And from that, he was able to set the exposure, and in the negative, he got all of the detail to print the moon, as well as all of this. Now, when you see it in the negative, it's hard to see that there's any detail there, but it was there. And this is what Verena was talking about. Verena, did you want to comment on this further?
Well, basically, it's what I said before, how important at the time. Now we all are into digital photography. There are no dark rooms. How important a dark room was at that time. And having spent a few hours with Ansel Adams in the dark room, it is so basically today it's so complicated. At the time, once you knew what you were doing, it's an amazing feat if you're seeing the negative and see this one, the positive, now that it's one of the most expensive photographs ever. And I just want to impress the importance of the darkroom at that time.
Yeah, the skill in printing. He was a marvelous technician. He was a great technician, and of course he had a great eye and a great appreciation for nature and the Sierra and all of that. But yeah, the skill in printing this is quite marvelous. Verena, how long would it take him to print something like this? What would you think?
What?
How long do you think it would take him to print this picture?
It can be, I mean, I've been in the darkroom sometimes for 12 hours and you
Yeah.
go on and on. It definitely takes a few hours
Yeah.
because then you put it into liquids and then you put it up to dry, then you look at it and you don't like it, you start all over again. So
Yeah.
it's hours.
Yeah. Well, one more artist that in the group F.64 gallery that we wanted to kind of point out was the Sonia Skoyak, and here you see three quite different pieces, different kinds of subjects that she's doing, and we thought it would be interesting to show you the comparison between her shell and Edward Weston's famous Nautilus, and just to open it up to the group and ask, what, when you compare and contrast, what do you see? What's the same? What's different here? Anybody have ideas?
You have the curves, they both have curves. In the case of the one on the left, it takes up the entire all the borders. The one that Weston did has more negative space around it. Also, I see a lot of like white, dark contrast. That's more pronounced in the Weston. I'd love to hear other thoughts from people. If you want to unmute and say what your impressions are, I'd love to hear that, or you can put it in chat.
That reminds me about those shells, like pearls, Rodney.
So it makes you think of something like a pearl, that these things from nature that kind of have these perfect rounded forms. Is that right, Paco?
Yes.
Yes, and in the Weston, he has this wonderful iridescence that he's able to capture. I think that's what you referred to. It looks like a pearl.
Other thoughts? I like them both. I have to say, I do like them both, and I wasn't as familiar with the Noskoviak.
The Skoyak, yeah, the Skoyak.
Skoyak. But I love, I just really find it looks like almost like a human brain or something,
Yeah.
Really interesting shape.
And all of this is very interesting. All of these, what they call them, chambers, yeah. So, I like them both as well. They're very different.
Comment in chat from Eddie. On the left photo, I like the contrast between the texture on the left and the smoothness on the right. And Nikki says, makes me desire the conch, Mexican pan dulce. Oh, yes.
Yes.
You're getting us ready for our T-boat conversation.
Yes. Any other comments in chat there?
Oh, by the way, that reminds me about the mushroom to your right, Robert.
Yeah.
Like a mushroom, like eating in a Chinese
Oh,
restaurant.
like a mushroom. Yes, yeah. Well, and that is the magic of Weston's photography. That look what he captured there. Look at all the texture and the glow and all of that. And again, this is something where he worked very hard to create a good negative, and then a lot of time in the darkroom to make it come to fruition.
I think it's another photograph where you can, look at the thing itself,
Yes.
but
Yes.
then you can imagine many other things as a result of looking at the thing itself. It really forces you, it doesn't force you, but it invites you to look at other possible abstract forms that are within there. And you can think about the, the one on the left in the same way as well. We have this very, very fine, pure photograph, but you could almost imagine the dunes of a beach or something like that, or parts of a cell, or any number of things that you can see within the photograph. Once you have recognized what Niskoyak was trying to do, she then invites you to make other forms as well from within the form that she's created.
Right, right, yes, exactly. Well, that brings us to, that's the end of the Group F.64 gallery, and it brings us to the rest of the exhibition, several more galleries, which are the after Group F.64, and they are showing photographs that were photographers who were influenced by F.64, and one of the wonderful ones is John Gutmann. He was a San Francisco photographer. He was born in Germany. He came to San Francisco as a young man, and he was a professor at San Francisco State. And his photography in San Francisco is very much about the sort of stranger in a strange land. Someone who comes here as a foreigner, he sees all these strange things that he was not used to, and that's what he photographed. That's what he was interested in. Here's another wonderful piece by him, very different. Then this picture by Max Yabna, which I think all three of us loved, of children playing on a very steep hill in San Francisco in front of this rather run-down facade. And you may know some of these hills that are so steep that they have to have steps to get up and down them.
Yeah, and it's very San Francisco.
Very San Francisco, yeah.
I find that the last three photographs, if you go back, showing us really one of the most important things about what photographers do. It's the light. Look at the light in here. I mean, you have dark and light. It's very special. And the next ones also there. I mean, the light on some of the hats, and it's amazing. You have to recognize the light as a photographer.
Yeah.
And this one, I think, is just a study in geometric forms.
Yes.
That makes it so wonderful.
Yeah.
A lot of different lines, a lot of repetitive shapes, a lot of angles, and then of course you have this very strong diagonal cutting across, which is provided by the hill that cuts across the photograph.
Yeah, so can you see the influence of Group F.64 in this, even though it's very different? You see the influence, what Charlie's talking about, the abstractions and so on. Another after Group F.64 example, Peter Stackpole, who did a whole series of photographs during the construction of the Bay Bridge, 1935-36. And again, here I think you see the strong influence of Group F.64. It's all about the abstraction. I mean, we know what's going on, but he's showing us, these men standing on these girders over the bay. Charlie.
Right, and now we have Dorothea Lange. And I don't know how many of you know her history, but basically she was a portrait photographer. She came from the East Coast to work in San Francisco and made her money doing portraits of families. And you could make a pretty decent income at that point doing that. And it was, interestingly enough, a very common thing for female photographers to do. It was a way that they could make money. And then one day, she sees this group of men hanging around a bread line. And she decides to take her camera outside and she captures this photograph, which she calls the White Angel breadline. And in fact, there was a white angel. There was a woman who would provide money for a soup kitchen. And what makes this photograph so great, well, there's a lot of things that make this a great photograph, but one of the things that in particular that works for me is the fact that you have almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody facing in the same direction that we are. We're, looking basically the same way. And then we have this one man in the center who is looking away. And he's so distinguishable because of his obvious poverty. Everyone else has a hat that's pretty much intact, pretty much clean, pretty much in the form that it's supposed to be. And here we have this man with this really raggedy hat on top of his head. You know, he's got this cup of some sort of warm liquid, soup, coffee, tea, whatever it might be. You can see him sort of holding his hands, trying to keep warm. And then on top of that, she's adding these important lines through the photograph. So we have that really strong diagonal of the bar that he's leaning on, an even stronger diagonal of the bar that's below it. And it makes for a really good artistic photograph as well as a powerful political statement. And of course, what happens is that Fred Stryker, who was the head of an organization that was hired by the government to take photographs of people out in the fields, people knew what poor people look like in the cities. That was something that they were known for, but they didn't have a good sense of what poverty looked like in the fields. So the Farm Security Administration hired these photographers to take pictures of poor rural people. And so when Stryker saw that prior photograph, he had Dorothea Lange hired on to take photographs of people working in these fields. And of course, I think about what I talked about earlier when let's go back just a second, Rob, before we go to this one.
Yeah.
You know, when we were looking at the Excusado, the toilet by Weston, think of where Weston had his camera. Well, here's Dorothea Lange doing the same thing. She's basically putting her camera on the ground. So we're looking upward towards that. You know, it's that worm's eye view. And it's often used as a way to sort of elevate the people that are in a particular photograph. And so it's a really interesting angle that she's doing. Plus, it's just a great photograph. Let's go to the next one. You know, and then there's this photograph, which is arguably the most famous photograph in the world. You know, you can certainly name a couple of other important photographs that are right up there with them. But the story behind this is such a great story. So she had already done a bunch of photographs at another migrant worker site. And she was driving back home to San Francisco, and she passes this sign about, you know, a bean field that's, you know, just off the highway there. And she says to herself, I've had enough photographs for today. I'm good. And she drives about 20 miles north, and she can't get that sign out of her mind about this bean field where they're looking for pickers. She turns the car around and goes back and finds this family that was working in the bean fields. And apparently it was a horrible year for the bean crop. It became cold early and it destroyed all their crops. And so she saw this very, very poor, starving family. And, you know, if you've ever heard Dorothea Lange speak, she had sort of a patrician accent. She had a very, very refined way of talking. But she had polio as a kid. And because of the polio, she was left with a little bit of a limp in her leg. And she would use that as a way to garner sympathy from her subjects to make them somehow connect in a way. So she sees this family, she sort of limps very, you know, exaggeratingly towards this family and, you know, lets the kids play with her equipment and gets to know them. And of course, they warm up to her and she's able to capture this photograph. And this is just an amazing photograph of what the depression experience was for these rural migrant workers. And I don't know if you know this, but there's not three people in this photograph, which is what many people think. There's actually a fourth. There's a little baby that's under her arm. But you know, just the way that the hand is resting on the chin, the way her wrinkles are in her forehead, the way her eyes are looking off into the distance. It's such a powerful photograph. And of course, it's been used and reused in many forms. You know, people have sort of doctored this photograph to their own uh, liking. And, you know, it's a documentary photograph, except it's not a true documentary photograph. If you are pure true documentary photograph, you would have been upset by the fact that she moved the curtain a little bit in order to capture this particular scene. She can't help herself. She knows what great art is. So she knows she's supposed to capture documentary pictures of people, at their lowest, at their struggles. But she can't help herself. She has to get this great, great photograph, which is, of course, what she does. And I'm fine with the fact that she moved the tent flap a little in this picture. And you can see other photos from this session. I think there's probably about 8 or 10 photos that she took at this field. But this is the one, of course, that she focuses on because it's so powerful.
And you talk about the thing itself. I mean, right? This expression, it just captured the feeling. Charlie.
Yes, and here's another example. I always talk about how some photographers know exactly what they want when they're taking a photograph. They know what they're expecting to see in the finished image. And sometimes photographers just get lucky. They mean to take a photograph of something and then realize once they get it out of the darkroom that they've captured something that they didn't even realize. There's a whole movie about this. It was a Blow Up, where this photographer happens to capture a murderer in the background of a photograph. So here's a photograph which I don't know if Anna Keefe meant to get all these different angles in it, but here we have this photograph that captures all these brilliant geometric shapes in it. We have this very, very large triangle that's holding up this lamp. And then the two lamps themselves, even though they are round lamps, the way that they're captured, they are in fact triangular shapes. And then, of course, if you look to the left of those lamps, we have the actual triangle that you use to set up the pool balls when before the rack, if you will, the triangular rack. So she's getting all these different forms in there. And at the same time, you have all these great lines. We have the line of the bar of the lamp. We have the line of the pool cue that the man on the right is holding, and then a different angle that the man on the left is holding. So it's really a brilliant geometric study of a pool hall.
So again, do you see the influence of Group F.64, albeit a few years later, in this piece? That's the intention of showing it in the museum. And here we did an interesting comparison of 3 photographers photographing cypress trees. So here's Anna Keefe, who we've just been talking about, her 1941 picture of a cypress, Edward Weston, and Sonia Neskoyak. And I think you certainly see the influence of Weston and Neskoyak on each other. And interesting to see Anna Keefe's, taking on what she sees in these other photographs, but then making it her own, if you will. Well, the next gallery is a rather fun exhibition. It's a whole wall of these photographs. The photographer is if I could get the name right, Tara Krunjinak, I guess is the way you pronounce it. And what she's doing is she's taking this book, Edward Weston Nudes. It's a well-known publication, and she's rephotographing each of the plates in the book as a self-portrait. And so, in each one you see the original. So here's the picture in the book, and here is her self-portrait recreating it. And again, the picture in the book and the recreation of a rather complex pose, and again the cover image. And so there's a whole wall of these. It's really a fun gallery to see. The unfortunately this wire, which is the cable release, kind of for me kind of detracts from it. But she's taking self-portraits, and that's how she actually photographed it.
She could have used her Apple Watch.
Not in those days.
It's interesting, Rob, that you've commented on that before.
Yeah.
How you find that distracting. I actually kind of like the
You
wire.
like it? Yeah.
And for one thing, one of the things that she hasn't done is she hasn't straightened the wire out. So you get these curvaceous forms within the wire.
Yeah.
which in some ways mirror the form of the human body. So I actually
Yeah.
find it intriguing
Yeah.
that she
Yeah.
puts that in there.
But you know, she's also showing you the making of the photograph, right? In other words, she could take this photograph and she could crop it the same way as the Weston is, right? Do it side by side, but she doesn't do that. She shows you all the all the mechanics, if you will, of creating the photograph in each of these. So I think that's obviously part of what she's trying to do. So. And then there's another gallery devoted to the School of Fine Arts, which is later the San Francisco Art Institute. And this was there was a program in fine art photography that was set up by Ansel Adams after World War II. And it was the first program to teach fine art photography at a university level. Up until then, photography had been taught in trade schools and basically as a craft, but not as a fine art. And so this was the first program for that, was Adams established. And what a marvelous opportunity these students had to be immersed in this wonderful community of photographers who existed around the Bay Area in those days. Here's an example. Here's Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams teaching a class. Here is Brett Weston, whose work we saw before, showing off his large format contact prints. Here, these are the students at Wildcat Hill, which was his father's very primitive cabin where he lived late in life. Here's Edward Weston, and by the way, over in the corner. Here's an example of the work from that first class. David Johnson, who was an African-American photographer, had a very, very wonderful career, but he started out photographing what was then the thriving Fillmore district in San Francisco in the 40s, which of course, unfortunately, was really devastated and by the redevelopment, which came along in the 60s and basically, essentially tore down the neighborhood.
Weston Herman, thank you.
Yes, there you go. Jim Goldberg, moving into the 1970s, another graduate of the Art Institute, and there's a series of photographs from this series called Rich and Poor, and what he did is he made a photograph, he printed it, and gave it back to the subjects, and asked them to write on it. So here you see the father writes, "I love David, but he is too fragile for a rough father like me."
Yeah, it's a really powerful series, and I
Yes.
would welcome anyone. First of all, gotta love the photographer because of his last name, first of all. But it's really, his photographs are very moving, and the comments by the people. In this particular one, it's a very sad comment. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a sad comment. A lot of the comments are varied, and it's a really interesting study of urban living.
Yeah, it's a wonderful idea, just what he was doing. And then we move into the 80s, and again, another graduate of the Art Institute. Just so many wonderful photographers came out of that program over the years. Janet Delaney was documenting the changing South of Market landscape, where they tore everything down, redevelopment, and built Moscone Center, SFMOMA, etc. And if this flag maker's wall painting looks familiar, it's probably because you have seen it at SFMOMA today. Here's the entrance, the Howard Street lobby, and here you actually see it from the lobby. It's still there, and they fortunately preserved it. So that wraps up our little tour of f.64. If you're interested in learning more, we'd recommend these two books. Seeing Straight is a catalog that was done by the Oakland Museum a number of years ago when they mounted an exhibition of Group f.64 work. And this book by Mary Street Allender, entitled Group f.64, which is a detailed history of f.64, how it came about, backgrounds of all the photographers, very, very, very detailed work. She, I think, did research for something like 30 years, pulling all of this together. And a personal note, in the 1980s, Mary Allender, the author, worked at the Weston Gallery in Carmel, a very fine photography gallery, and she sold me my first fine art photograph. And look what happened.
Very good, Robert.
Well,
So,
I really
any
want
other-
to thank the three of you for this presentation. I have a question. It seems like this is a very San Francisco story that you're telling about this group. Were there connections on the East Coast? Were there New York photographers who were influenced by them and were doing the same thing?
Interesting. Well, of course, we talked about Stieglitz and the photo secession, and if you recall, that where the goals were similar, to move away from pictorialism and towards the use of photography that really utilized its unique qualities of focus, sharp focus, and depth of field, and so on. So I suppose you could say there were, although they were not directly associated with f.64. f.64 really was just that group of what, 11 photographers or whatever, that got together and did that. And it only lasted, f.64 formally only lasted as a group about a year, and yet it influenced all that was to follow. Very strong influence on California photography. So I think you could say yes, that there were New York, there were East Coast photographers that were.
It's a very San Francisco story, and something we should be proud of, that our city fostered this great culture and movement that resulted from it.
Yeah. I mean, it really did change photography, not single-handedly, because you have modernism, photographic modernism coming into play in the East Coast, but it really did change photography, and moving away from pictorialism, which was the primary style up until then.
We have some comments in chat. Paco was a big fan of this. He said, this is amazing. Sherry says that this was great. And then she mentions Coleman, her son, saying, who wants to say hi to you, Rob.
Hello, Coleman.
Great. And yep, Paco, always great having Paco. Paco, what did you think of the program today?
This is so informative, Rodney.
Well, good. You are our most loyal audience member, so we love having that. We will be back. I think it's going to be 3 weeks, right? We're back on July 14th, and we will be talking about Wayne Thiebaud. So again, eat your dessert before the program, because it's going to definitely whet your appetite for sweets. It's good. And if you get a chance, try to get to the Legion of Honor to see that exhibition in advance. And we will be recording that program. Hope you can join in person, but if you can't, you'll be able to go on our YouTube channel and see that. Charlie, Rob, Verena, just want to really thank you again. And what a thorough, fascinating presentation this has been.
Pleasure. Always love being with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
It was my pleasure to all of you.
I want to mention one more thing, which is that Jennifer, who is our technical moderator, and I are working on a disability pride set of tours. And you can go to the Community Living Campaign website for more information about these. Also, if you get my email that goes out every Friday, I will put information about, it's going to be like a treasure hunt. We're going to go to visit places that are important to the disability community in San Francisco, and just talk about disability pride and how important it is that people from that community have the visibility, and we understand like what it's like to navigate the world as they do. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. We really appreciate everything you do for this program, and I'm really excited to be working with you. Nikki, tell us more about what's going to happen next with the Community Living Campaign. Oh, you're muted.
We're meeting next July 14th, which is Bastille Day, and it looks like Richie's getting a jump on Bastille Day because tonight he's talking about French rock. So that'll be on tonight from 6 to 7:30. Join us again on another Zoom. He always has a huge crowd. So that'll be fun. Let's see, beyond that, the usual tech stuff and writing groups, exercise. You can find our information on our link I put in the chat, sfcommunityliving.org. So thanks
I
everybody.
will be there, Nikki.
Okay.
Great.
Right.
Thanks,
See
Paco.
some of you guys
Yeah.
tonight. Everyone be
Bye.
well.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye, Verena.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Rob.